Hello, welcome back to my basement. Today's lesson is going to be on team dynamics. You may be wondering why we are talking about team dynamics in an engineering class, and that's a reasonable question, but I think you're going to find, I believe this may be one of the most valuable lessons you have in this whole course, if not your entire engineering curriculum, especially those of you who don't see yourselves going out and being mechanical engineers in the Air Force or for a career. What we're going to talk about is how we can more effectively get work done in a collaborative fashion by understanding a little bit about ourselves and about the members of our team and how they approach thinking about a problem. So that's what the purpose of this lesson is. I hope you'll find it valuable. I think it's valuable. Okay, I'm going to share my screen real quickly so you can see the PowerPoint. Hopefully by the time you've seen this, you've taken your personality test, the two different assessments that I sent you. I encourage you to take that before this lesson. So if you are hearing this now and you haven't taken those assessments yet, I encourage you to pause this and go take those and then come back to the lesson. The reason I say that is we're going to talk about those instruments here in a minute, and I don't want you to be, I don't want the discussion we're going to have be biasing your answers to that assessment. Those assessments are going to be the most valuable and most helpful to you if you answer them as honestly as possible. They are entirely there to help you out and help you understand yourself better and how you're going to approach problems and how you're going to approach working as a team. So the more honest you can be, the more actionable information you're going to get from that. Okay, so I'm sharing my slides now. Hope you can see them. So a little joke to start off. A few harmless flakes working together can unleash an avalanche of destruction. And that's what we aspire to do here. We want to be disruptive innovators. And so if we think of ourselves as, I like to think of ourselves as flakes in the sense that we're going to approach a problem from a direction that our standard DoD sponsors wouldn't normally approach a problem. And by working together, we're gonna disrupt the way they are approaching that problem. Okay, next slide. Make sure you're getting your textbook. If you have any questions on that, please let me know. It's going to be an invaluable resource for you the rest of the year. A little bit about individuality. Always remember that you're unique, just like everybody else. Okay. Why are we talking about team dynamics at all in an engineering class? I want to take a step back in time a little bit, about 500 years to the mid-Renaissance period, late Renaissance period, around the turn of the 15th century, so late 1400s, early 1500s. There was a family in Florence, Italy, named the Medici, and they were patrons of artists and scientists. And what that meant to be a patron is that in those times, if you wanted to show how wealthy you were and gain status, you couldn't buy a Beamer and drive it around your neighborhood. Instead, what you would do is commission works of art. You would keep artists on staff, and they would do paintings. They would make portraits of members of your family, all those sorts of things. And so the way you got status in that culture, the way you flaunted your wealth was by basically sponsoring artists and scientists and engineers and paying to have buildings designed and built and those sorts of things. So they were extremely successful as accountants and helped grow commerce in Italy by setting up systems for loaning money, exchanging money, and obviously, took a lot off the top while they were doing it and became very wealthy. And they valued art and science and helped support a lot of famous artists that we know today. So pictured at the bottom of the screen there is Leonardo da Vinci. They also patronized a gentleman named Brunelleschi, who was a brilliant engineer. Also Michelangelo, Donatello, many of the other Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that that are known as the great masters of artwork. What's the point? Why am I talking about this? Their interest in bringing a culture to Florence, Italy, resulted in them bringing a lot of different, diverse people together in a group. And what resulted was an explosion of innovation, not just in art, in the art world, but also in science, in literature, in engineering, in construction methods. And that process of bringing a diverse group of people together to work together and collaborate is today still known as the Medici effect. And that's what we're talking about. There's been boatloads of research that substantiate the claim that if you bring a diverse group of people together, they're more likely to come up with solutions that are higher quality, that work better, that are more innovative. And so that's what we're trying to do. We'd like to ideally have diversity on our teams in terms of your technical discipline, in terms of how you think, if you're a left brain or right brain type of person. We'll talk about that later in the course. Diversity in your expertise, in the experiences you've had, geographical diversity, where you're from, all the kind of demographic type diversity, your age, your ethnicity, gender, all those sorts of things. Obviously, we don't have much diversity in age on our design teams because the nature of the academic system, you all tend to be seniors, undergraduate seniors, so you're about 21, 22 years old, but you do have access to other engineers or other experts that have different age. So hopefully you're including your sponsor representatives in your ideation. They're going to be a different age than you. Obviously, your advisor, the lab techs. You can also go in a different direction. We've had many teams in the past who would take their design problem to, say, an elementary school classroom and have young kids participate in an ideation session. That can be a lot of fun, and you'll get all kinds of different types of ideas than you would get just working with a group of cadets. Just 2 years ago, we had a group, we brought in, they asked faculty to bring in their kids, and we had a group of about a dozen kids. I know Colonel Cooper's son David came, my two kids came. We had, and the cadets loved it. They had a great time. They got a lot of interesting ideas, and one of those ideas actually flowered into their final solution. So that can be really effective as well. All right, so the final thing is we'd like a diversity in your personality profiles, and that's why we're doing these assessments. And we're not going to modify the team membership based on that, but we are going to be able to use what we learn about your personality to inform how you approach a discussion. All right, here's good. Hopefully you guys know what the far side is. This is a cartoon that's really awesome. So I'll give you a moment to read about the 4 basic personality types. So you guys all get to try to figure out who on your team is the guy who ordered a cheeseburger. And I think there's the old joke that if you're not sure who that person is in your group, then it's probably you. All right, so my goal ultimately is that we have 9 highly effective design teams. And how do we have effective design teams? Well, the most effective teams make the best use of the team's composition. And that's what today's lesson is about, is learning about who is on your team so we can understand that and then figure out how to use them in the best way. We want to capitalize on strengths. We want to minimize weaknesses or compensate for weaknesses. We want to make sure everyone is functioning at the highest level possible. We want to tailor tasks to everybody's strengths. Now, there's I need to add, say about that, we also want to learn to do things we're not necessarily good at. So we want to give people practice. So for example, a great example is briefing. When you're at your final end of the year briefing and you're going to brief, a general or a chief scientist of an AFRL directorate, I want your two best briefers to be out there to put the best foot forward for your team. But at, say, your critical design review, I want every person on the team to brief so that you can get practice giving a briefing in a high pressure situation. So there's times where we want you to do something you're not good at so that you can get practice in the hopes of getting better at it. But there's other times where we want to just maximize everyone's strengths and use the assets that we have in the best way. We want to have fun doing what we're doing while working hard. The big bumper sticker here is do the most of what you do best, but learn to function competently in weak areas. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, so let's talk about the assessments. So I asked you to do 2 different assessments. Again, if you haven't taken the assessments, please pause this and go take the assessments and then come back. And it's interesting and helpful to look at your scores while we're going through this. So Myers-Briggs type indicator, I'd be shocked if you've made it this far in life and not having done one of these before. So you've probably seen this before. But keep in mind, these change and can change a lot throughout your lifetime. So even if you did this maybe when you were a freshman, take this again because you may have changed as you may have grown out of your shell if you were highly introverted before, or maybe you've become less tolerant of people and now you're more of an introvert than you used to be. Okay, so there's what we tend to focus on a lot is, are you an introvert or an extrovert? A lot of engineers tend to be introverts. But I score heavily as an introvert, but I can pretend to be an extrovert. And obviously you need to behave in an extroverted way while you're teaching. And I spent a lot of my life teaching, whether it's teaching in the classroom or coaching rock climbers at the climbing gym. So just because this assessment rates you as being an introvert doesn't mean you can't do extroverted things. That's a huge takeaway I'd like you to get from this lesson. Okay, then there's the way you process information. Is it through sensing or intuition? And then there's thinking versus feeling. How do you process information? And how do you come to conclusions? Are you a judgment or perception? And we'll touch on a little bit later those who tend to make judgments quickly. Okay, so how does this affect our design process, or how do we interact as a team? So if you rate highly as an extrovert, you want to be aware of the fact that you may have a tendency to speak over people or occupy dead space in a meeting. You may be uncomfortable with silence in a meeting and have an urge to try to fill that by speaking, telling a story, doing something like that. You should be aware that there may be people on your team who really value that silence and are using that time to process, to come up with ideas. And it's okay to have silence in a conversation or in a meeting. I tell a funny joke. I knew my wife Janelle was a fit for me when we could go on a long car ride and not talk for an hour. That was like heaven to me, because for me, being an introvert, I need that time to recharge and not be constantly talking. Okay, so if you're an introvert, they're going to want to fill that space and use that time to individually process. So realize if you've got someone on your team who isn't talking, that may not mean that they don't like you and that they're uncomfortable. It just maybe mean that they're an introvert and they're using that time to process, and they need that kind of quiet time. Okay, so is someone who's an S, N versus S, an example here is they may benefit from having like tactile things to hang on to. So if you're doing an ideation session, they may enjoy like spinning their pencil or flipping a coin or having a ball there. That doesn't mean that they're being disrespectful. It may actually help them to come up with ideas better. So be respectful of that. Whereas intuitors may benefit from thoughtful thought experiment type of thinking. Okay, so a final one is the judgers for, I'm a judger. I tend to be a judger, and I have to actively restrain myself from jumping to conclusions, especially during ideation. We'll talk about this more when we get to ideation, but one of the ground rules is you don't criticize ideas. You let ideas flow freely and wait until a different step in the process to critique ideas or compare them to one another. So if you tend to be on the J side, and I would say a lot of military officers tend to be on the J side of things, you need to be careful not to instantly blurt out that the flaws that you see in someone's idea. Okay, and I can fall victim to that a lot. And if you see me doing that, if I walk into your room and you guys are ideating and I start going, well, there's probably not enough energy density in that battery to get that thing to fly. You say, hey, Dr. Anderson, we're just brainstorming here, so give us a break, and we'll think about those things later. And I'll be like, yeah, you're right. Okay, sorry. All right. So what else did we do? So the other assessment I had to do is called 6 hats. And this is really interesting. This has been used really effectively in the business community, especially, but it has a lot of application to what we do here. And you took an assessment which tried to identify what your tendency is. And I want to be very clear about that. Whatever the assessment results were, those are not your destiny. Okay. So if it said you tend to be a black hat, that doesn't mean that you're always a black hat. And in fact, the way we implement this here at the Academy, where we give you a survey and it gives you a score of what your tendency, that's actually pretty unusual. Usually this 6 hats method is not implemented in that way with an assessment. Instead, it's implemented in a process in which we don't assume anyone has a tendency at all. We just say, all right, for this activity, we want you to put on a blue hat, and you're going to act as if you're going to think as in this blue method of blue manner of thinking. And then later, we're going to take the blue hat off and put on the red hat, and you're going to think in the red hat. Okay, so I say all that to say, don't feel like whatever the score you got is going to predetermine what your behavior has to be. So what's interesting is how these different modes of thinking align with our capstone design process. So the blue hat is someone who thinks really well about how to organize things, how to plan, how to control a process. Well, that sounds a lot like the first step of our design process and project planning. And the way this technique would be implemented in the private sector, you would kick off every meeting by saying, everyone in the group, we're going to put on the blue hat and think in our organizational thinking mode. And you would use that to start the meeting by planning what are we going to accomplish in this meeting? What are the goals? What are the outcomes we expect? And you'll see also that that's at the end of the meeting as well, that before you end the meeting, you put the blue hat back on and you think about, what did we accomplish? What are the action items to take out of this meeting? When should we meet next? What do we need to accomplish between now and the next meeting, et cetera? Okay, so those are activities you can do every time you come to Capstone. You should start the day thinking about, what's our goal for today? What are we going to accomplish? And then at the end of class, take the last couple minutes and say, okay, what did we get done? What do we still have left to do? How are we going to accomplish those things? All right, the red hat is someone is thinking emotionally, and that's really important. You might, as engineers, we tend to try to avoid dealing with our emotions, right? But there's really important aspects of that. So the reason they put red second is, a lot of times, especially if you're presented with a new challenge, you have some sort of visceral reaction to it. You have an emotional reaction. And it can be helpful to get those emotions out on the table right when you start. So, when I came into class on day one, I said, you guys are all going to do this mini design project. You had some emotional reaction. You might have had anxiety. Some of you hopefully had excitement. You had enthusiasm. And so it's helpful to, right at the start, just put down on the table, hey, I'm really excited about this challenge. I think this is going to be cool. someone might say, I'm optimistic. I think we're going to come up with a good solution. Others might say, I'm kind of fearful, or I'm discouraged. I think this problem's too hard, or I have anxiety because I've got a final next week and this is due the day before, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's helpful to get those emotions out on the table so everyone knows where they're coming from. Also, if you rate highly in the red category, it means you're likely to have higher empathy than someone who rated lower. And empathy is extremely important in an engineering design process, because we need to see ourselves as a customer, or put ourselves in the shoes of the customer. Engineers or designers or companies that fail to be able to see the customer's perspective will fail, because they will design the wrong thing, and they won't produce a product that people want to use. Okay, the white hat is thinking logically and using facts and figures. And so this is really helpful in the early stages of the design process, doing background research. And you can also apply this to doing your customer needs analysis. This is going out and collecting information. So someone who scores high with a white hat is probably someone who may enjoy collecting data, collecting figures, figuring out what is truth. And that person can be leveraged to do that background research and customer needs analysis. All right, yellow and green are, hopefully you have at least one person on your team who scores highly in one of these categories. Greens are known as the creative types, and those are the people you want to throw your toughest ideas at. But all of us can behave in a green fashion by, meaning be creative, by the tools and techniques I'm going to show you later in the semester for ideation, and also by following some simple ground rules. And I've alluded to those already, that we are accepting of other people's ideas, that we allow people to speak, and that we don't immediately criticize ideas as they're thrown out. So those skills are going to be extremely helpful during the concept generation process. A black hat is someone who's logical and wants to make decisions. And we tend to have a lot of black hats in our Mech Capstone, okay? And most of your faculty tend to wear black hats, especially when they walk into a classroom. If you think about it, a black hat is just like in the Myers-Briggs, like the judger type. And a black hat is going to want to quickly make a decision and also quickly assess if something is good or bad. As instructors, we're trained to be that way, right? We're trained to, you think about when you're in Mech 220, you're doing board work on the wall. As instructors, we were trained to be able to walk into that classroom, quickly look at all those different groups doing some statics problem, and figure out who's doing it right, who's doing it wrong, and quickly give them feedback. So you should all realize that our predisposition is to walk into the classroom, look at your whiteboard, and tell you what you're doing wrong. And we need to work hard to avoid doing that. That's not helpful in an engineering design process, not in every step of the engineering design process. So if we tend to do that, you have my permission to correct us. Okay, tell us, sir, this isn't obviously respectfully, right? Sir, this isn't the right time. We're brainstorming right now. And then most of us should know to back off. Your lab techs are going to tend to be this way also, right? You're going to tell them you've got this idea for this hopping robot that's going to fly over fences or something, and they may want to jump and tell you why it's not going to work. Okay, well, there is a time when we want to put on our black hat, and that's when we're doing what's called a diverging process in the engineering design process. So where we're trying to shrink a large set of ideas and narrow it down to a few ideas that we can focus our efforts on. When we're doing that process, that's when we want to make decisions. We want to be logical, and we want to identify the weaknesses in various ideas. Okay, and finally, there's the blue hat again, where you want to finish any activity with some organizational thought. Okay, what are we going to do next? What do we need to still do? Okay, we're getting towards the end here, so I won't go into too much detail here. You want to, on your team, you want to have a mix of black and yellow. You want to have a green person, hopefully as many as possible. But I will say, as I mentioned right here, if you don't have someone who rates highly as a green, we can learn that. Okay, we've done research that shows that you can learn to be more creative, and I'm going to teach you how to be more creative. Okay. Any of these roles you can take on, even if you don't have someone on your team who scored highly, you can take on, you can assume that role. You could say, in this meeting, I'm going to act as the black hat. Now, make sure you coordinate that with your teammates. You shouldn't go into a meeting and just decide you're going to act in some crazy fashion as an experiment. Okay, so run that by your team first. All right. I think we're getting near the end here. So here's some rules of thumb. So if you are creating a team, this is more for your use later in life. Imagine you're a flight commander down the road, or maybe you're doing something in your squadron. You're trying to assemble a team to maybe to plan the commissioning ceremony next spring. That's something cool to think about, right? You might want to think about assembling a team with these mixes of characteristics. And you're welcome to use the assessment tool we used, and have your squadron mates fill those out, and you can classify the people in your squadron. Okay. All right. Some rules for how we're going to interact as Capstone teams. Number one, we want to assume the best of each other, and these rules are great for life. Okay, you want to maybe you're going to be married someday. You want to have a family. You're going to have kids that you're going to hopefully teach and develop, and you're going to be great parents. And think about these things as you're communicating with anyone. First of all, assume that the best of each other. Assume that if someone says something, it's because they have their intention is good, right? If you have substantial concerns, you need to bring it up to someone, and obviously you want to address those things in private if possible. Okay, but don't just it says don't stuff it on the slide. Don't bury a feeling that you have, or some issue that you have with a team member. Address it so that it doesn't fester and grow to be worse. Okay. When you're communicating, make sure you're being respectful, giving people a chance to talk. And that could mean don't interrupt someone when they're talking. But if you're talking, also be cognizant of the time you're using, and make sure everyone in the group has an opportunity to speak. Those who are more introverted may be less likely to interject into a conversation. So you want to actually try to elicit those comments from them. Okay. This final thing I can't emphasize enough. In this class, we want our teams to succeed. You guys want your project to succeed, and we don't succeed by winning an argument, okay, or even perpetuating an argument. It's by getting to the right answer, getting to the best solution. All right, that's it. That's all there is for this lesson. So take what you've learned here. Your team advisors are going to delve into this a little bit more with your specific results. So send you the results of your assessments to your advisor. They're going to compile them and help paint a picture for how your whole team is. And that's going to help you inform how you go forward. Okay, thank you for listening. Appreciate it. I'll see you in the lab.